What? 1 in a million thing happened to you? What is the most statistically improbable thing that has ever happened to you? In the middle of making an omelette, I answered the door while holding a whole egg. It turned out to be my new neighbor asking if she could borrow an egg. The look of confusion on her face when I produced one on the spot was only matched by my own. She took it and left without saying a word. It was super weird. You should have reached behind her ear and pulled out the egg magician style. That is one hell of a missed opportunity. Next time a new neighbor moves in near me, I'm going to carry about my person an egg, a cup of sugar and a jug of milk, just in case. The work I used to do required me to carry a lot of keys. At the end of my shift every day I would go to hang up my keys on a cup hook, but as I entered the room I would toss them over to the board with the hooks, trying to get them to land on the hook. And every day the keys would miss and fall to the floor. I would retrieve them and hang them and sit and do my paperwork. One day, at the end on my shift, I was a bit later than usual and the supervisors were in the room. Again I tossed my keys and they hooked. All of the supervisors were stunned, but my direct supervisor said, "I bet you couldn't ever do that again." I grabbed the keys off the hook, walked over to the door and tossed them again. And again they landed on the hook. And in the 2 years of working there, that was the only 2 times they caught. Was working a wine banquet back in college on a nice sunny afternoon in a wide open field with no trees. Pretty much everyone was gone, and we were wrapping up after a long day. I yawned and the only bird for miles shit right in my mouth as he flew by, the fucker. That and the brain aneurysm that I had about a 1/25,000 chance of surviving. But I'm still here, looking for that goddamned bird. I've been saving a bottle of X-Lax just for him. Caw motherfucker. My friend's bank account number is the same as her passport number. Assuming these are both 9-digit codes, and all the digits are assigned with equally randomly from the pool 0 to 9, the probability of this happening is 1 in a billion. A guy with the same name and same birth date as me died. I was doing a job at the law firm where his will was held on the day of the reading. They freaked out and asked me to confirm a bunch of details to make sure I hadn't died. "So, you dead?" "Nope." "Why sure?" "Yep." "I know, crazy right?" She asked me my full name and date of birth, then asked me some about some insurance stuff and confirmed birth certificate wasn't mine. All I could think was, I'm standing right in front of you. Do I look dead? My brother and I were playing Excite Bike 64 in our younger days. There's a game mode where you climb a super steep cliff. The first time one of us ever reached the top, we both simultaneously whispered, "Mufasa." It scared the shit out of both of us, and I cried out of fear for probably 10 minutes. I found a random orange on the street while walking to school. I picked it up and tossed it down a driveway, and it landed right up against a car's back tire. When I was walking home, the car backed out of the driveway, and as it drove over the orange, it sprayed all over me. I ran up the rear end of a taxi twice on the same night. The first time I was going clubbing with mates, he'd locked his brakes and I drove straight up the back side. We exchanged details, etc. After the club we were driving back. I thought the cab in front looked familiar. He locked his brakes again. I smashed him again. He gets out and turns white. "You. Why? Edit. This was 20 years ago. Hey wow. This reminded me of when I used to drive taxis. It was a Saturday night, and I had got a job to pick up a fare at, and I'll never forget it, from XX Serpentine Avenue Baldwin to go into town. It's around 8 p.m. when I pick this couple up and take them to a restaurant in the CBD, and go off on my merry way taxiing around town. About 4 hours later, around 12:30 a.m., I'd had another 20+ jobs and driven randomly for about 250 kilometers all over town, and I'm now back in the CBD. I locked my doors and rolled down the passenger window a few inches so I can ask folks where they're going, 'cause I don't want big fares taking me far away and have to return empty, or have folks fighting over who got the taxi. And as I'm stopped at an intersection, this woman runs up and asks to go to the other end of town to a nightclub. I say sure and let her in, and then I realize she's with a guy, and it's the same couple from Serpentine Avenue. Hey trippy. Funny cool, we have a laugh at the coincidence, and I take them to go clubbing and I taxi off. At about 4 a.m., I'd done another 20 plus jobs and another 300 kilometers all around town, and I find myself in a line of taxis double parked outside a few nightclubs. I'm about sixth in line, people come out of the clubs and soon I'm first, when the back door opens and a couple jump in the back of my cab and say, XX Serpentine Avenue, well call me Rosie and fuck me dead. We were completely blown away. Once is a fare, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is just some fucking trippy, weird arse motherfucking woo. Taxiland was pretty trippy in general, for me. I had some amazing times, girls, drugs, drunk beakies et al. I've had a lot of crazy shit happen to me in my life, but this was about as statistically improbable as it gets, at least for me. Whilst on honeymoon, I bumped into my best friend from high school in Venice, Italy. I hadn't seen him for 14 years. He lives in Australia. I live in England. Twist. You married each other and were on your honeymoon together. I threw an orange at this bully's bike as he rode away and it bounced once, so perfectly, that it dislodged his chain and the bike abruptly stopped and he was thrown off. He stood up a bloody, crying mess, but oh boy, I was a hero. Oh man. That reminds me of a food fight we had in high school where I threw a chicken nugget that flew across the whole cafeteria and hit this girl's soda can just as she was taking a drink. 'Twas bitchin'. A similar thing happened to me. 2 guys were being mean, like kids are, and I kicked the football and it hit one guy directly in the face. The ball then bounced back to me and I kicked it again and it hit the other guy. It was good fun for me. I've been the millionth visitor to a ton of websites. I won a Frosted Flakes sweepstakes competition about 10 years ago. I was a kid and my mom filled out the form that was on the back of the box and sent it in and I ended up winning an all-expenses-paid trip to California, a PlayStation 2, and a shitload of money amongst other things. I always had thought sweepstakes were a scam and companies never followed through, but it turns out there actually are winners. I was teaching ESL in Korea and we went out one night to a local bar that had a monthly open mic night where a lot of us foreigners would gather. I got chatting with a random white guy at the bar and asked where he was from. He said Ottawa. I was like, no way, I used to live in Ottawa. Whereabouts in Ottawa did you live? He answered, Sandy Hill. I once again said, no way. Haha, I had a car stolen that was found there. His face goes slack. Was it an 88 to 91 Honda Civic? Yes. Yeah, I think that was me. Let me get your drinks for the night. I stood on a venomous snake by accident but escaped unhurt because I stood on its head. Once when I was surfing I stepped on a stingray's head and very narrowly jumped before he whipped his stinger forward to hit me. I felt like Spider-Man the whole day. When I was at university I would quite often get a taxi ride after a night out from a nice old man nicknamed Grandpa. He had Grandpa on his taxi license and had business cards with Grandpa on them, etc. He would always give you cheap rides and come whenever you called. Anyway, for years or so passed without me getting a ride from him. I had heard rumors that he had died, which was quite saddening. About a month or so ago, a couple mates and I were waiting to get picked up by a taxi when I decided to tell them about the story of Grandpa. So eventually I finished my story and our taxi arrived, with none other than Grandpa at the wheel. I was born into a middle-class family in the northeastern United States. The odds are pretty low and I'm quite fortunate. One time I ate a Kit Kat and it was all chocolate. I once had a chat with a random stranger on Omegle video for hours. Parted ways, didn't want to keep in touch. Bumped into the same person 1 year later and recognized the person immediately. I was on chat roulette once and this guy was playing guitar and me and my friends were drinking and recognized the song. It was Born of Osiris, and we just kept drinking watching him play. He asked if we had any requests. I requested Black and Blue by Bring Me the Horizon. He looked at the camera and said, "Do you guys know who I am?" Sure enough, he was the guitarist for Bring Me the Horizon, and he then played their whole Suicide Season album for us. It was pretty awesome. I got pulled over by the police because my car and the car in front of me had the same license plate. I was sitting at lights behind a wee black Vauxhall, with a police car behind me. Next thing I know, the police are asking us both to pull over. We both had the same license plate. Turns out that both cars were registered at the same dealership on the same day. A clerical error had led to both getting the same plate. Months later, we are both sitting at the same traffic light, and the police are there to see it. A bird pooped on my head while I was riding a bike, and therefore moving quite fast, and literally 5 minutes later, after I had cleaned up, a bird pooped on my head again. A crow shat into my shirt front pocket. From on top of a light post. There was nothing else in that pocket to hold it open. I win. This has got to be unlikely. I was on holiday at Universal Studios, Florida with my brother-in-law Nick. We're both Brits. When a random family rush over, start hugging and kissing him and speaking Spanish. Nick was very confused, until he heard them call him Chris. It turns out the family are Peruvian and live next door to Nick's identical twin Chris, who moved out to Peru 4 years earlier. I'd love someone to calculate the odds of that. It's 1:2 that he's either Chris or Nick at any given time. Unless you put him in a box, then he's both Chris and not Chris at any given time. Oh, Schrodinger's Chris. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.